Well, my name's George. Folks around here just call me Old George, though once upon a time, I was young like anybody else. I'm sitting here on this creaky porch, rocking back and forth on this old chair, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. It's funny how the sky bleeds into colors you can't name. Orange, gold, red, purple, like the Lord himself is painting it new every evening. Now, you gotta understand, when I was a boy growing up in the 1950s, this land was a lot wilder than what you see now. Back then, our farmhouse stood all alone among miles of fields. We didn't have neighbors close by, just cattle, coyotes, and the whistle of the wind coming through the mesquite trees at night. Life was simple, but it was tough. My daddy worked the land sunup to sundown, and I followed right behind him, learning how to mend fences, haul hay, and keep the chickens from getting snatched by foxes. I can still smell the wood smoke from Mama's stove. She'd holler at me from the kitchen window, "George, wash up, supper's ready." And I'd come running barefoot, dust sticking to my legs. The world felt big, but my world was small. Just that farm, my folks, and the horizon that seemed to stretch forever. And yet, even as a boy, sitting on this same porch swing, I used to dream about what lay beyond that horizon. What was out there, past the hills, past the desert, past the highways I'd only seen in magazines. I wanted to see it all, feel it all, taste the world beyond the farm. I guess every young man's got that fire in his belly. That's what led me to the road I'm about to tell you about. The road that changed me. The road that taught me what kind of man I was gonna be. I was 17 when I finally got my chance. My daddy had this old Ford pickup, rusty green, paint chipped on the hood, smelled like oil and leather inside. One summer morning, he tossed me the keys and said, "Son, if you think you're ready, go on and take her down the road." Now, he meant just around the county, maybe to haul some feed or check the fences. But me? I had something else in mind. There was a town nearly 300 miles away where my cousin had written me from. He said there was work there, money to be made, a chance to build something. My heart raced when I thought about it. I packed a sack with a change of clothes, Mama's cornbread wrapped in a cloth, and a canteen of water, slipped it in the cab, and before anyone could stop me, I fired up that Ford. The engine coughed, then roared like a stubborn bull. I gripped the wheel, hands sweaty, and rolled down that dusty driveway, watching the farm grow smaller in the rearview mirror. The road stretched out like a ribbon, endless and full of promise. I turned on the radio, crackly, but still singing Elvis Presley's "That's All Right." Windows rolled down, wind in my hair. I felt like the king of the world. It was the first time I'd ever been on my own. No one to tell me when to wake up, when to work, when to eat. Just me, the truck, and the horizon. But freedom ain't always sweet. After the excitement wore off, I started realizing how alone I was. The desert didn't care if I was 17 and full of dreams. It stretched wide, merciless, hot, and empty. My chest tightened, but I told myself, "George, you asked for this. Now keep driving." By the time the sun dipped low, I'd been driving nearly all day. My eyes were burning, my stomach was growling, and the gas gauge was sitting low. I spotted a flicker of neon lights up ahead, an old gas station with one pump, sitting all by itself in the middle of nowhere. I pulled in, engine sputtering. The place looked like something out of a movie. Dust blowing across the lot, moths dancing around the buzzing neon sign that read "Fuel and Coffee." Behind the counter was an old man, face weathered like leather, gray stubble on his chin. He gave me a long look, then shuffled over. "Fill her up?" he asked, voice deep and slow. "Yes, sir," I said, trying to sound older than I was. He pumped the gas, then motioned me inside. "Coffee's hot. You look like you need it." Inside, the place smelled of gasoline and burnt beans. I sat at the counter, hands wrapped around the warm mug he slid to me. For a while we didn't speak, just listened to the hum of the fridge in the back. Then he said something that stuck with me forever. "Son, the road's a teacher. Sometimes she'll give you a smooth ride, sometimes she'll beat you down till you're begging to quit. But you listen close, she'll tell you who you really are." I didn't know what to say, just nodded, taking it in. Back then, I thought it was just an old man spouting riddles. But looking back now, he was right. Every mile I drove after that proved it. The next day, I woke before dawn, back on the road. The air was cooler, stars still hanging above. But as the sun rose, so did the wind. By noon, the sky had turned an ugly yellow-brown, and before I knew it, I was caught in a sandstorm. Lord Almighty, I'd never seen anything like it. The wind screamed against the truck, sand slapping the windshield so hard it sounded like hail. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. My hands clenched the wheel till my knuckles went white. Every muscle in my body screamed, "Stop!" But I knew stopping in that desert meant getting buried alive in sand. I pushed forward, heart pounding. The truck groaned, tires sliding on the loose gravel. For hours, or maybe it just felt like hours, I wrestled with that wheel, praying out loud, "God, just get me through this, please." And then, like a curtain lifting, the storm broke. Blue sky peeked through, and the desert stretched quiet again as if nothing had ever happened. I pulled over, chest heaving, sweat soaking my shirt. For the first time in my life, I realized how small I was. That desert didn't care about me or my dreams, but I'd survived. And that survival, it lit something inside me. By the time I rolled into that little town, the sun was rising again. My truck was coated in dust. My clothes smelled of sweat and sand, and my eyes burned from no sleep. But I'd made it. I stepped out of the truck and felt the solid ground under my boots, heard the faint sounds of life. Church bells, a train whistle, kids laughing somewhere down the street. I remember smiling, not because I had found the work my cousin promised, but because I knew something deeper. I could depend on myself. I could face the storm and come out the other side. That trip turned a boy into a man. Now, all these years later, sitting back on this porch, I think about that road often. Folks ask me if I regret leaving home like that. And I say no, because the road gave me more than just miles. It gave me myself. By the time the next evening rolled around, I had driven nearly 400 miles. The desert roads stretched on, and though I loved the freedom, I was starting to feel that loneliness gnawing at me again. That's when I spotted him. An old man walking along the side of the highway, thumb sticking out, dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. He looked like he'd been walking for days. I slowed the Ford and leaned out the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes tired but sharp, like he'd seen too much of the world. "If you don't mind, son." He climbed into the cab, smelling of sweat and tobacco, and we drove in silence for a while. Then he began talking, not about where he was headed, but about where he'd been. He told me about riding the rails in the 1930s, about losing friends in the war, about working in oil fields where men drank hard and died young. I listened, hands tight on the wheel. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just driving toward my future. I was riding alongside men who had already lived theirs. And every story they carried was like a warning, or maybe a gift. Before dawn, I dropped him off at another station. He tipped his hat and said, "Don't waste the miles, kid. Every one of them counts." Then he walked off into the night, and I never saw him again. By the time I hit a dusty little border town, my money was running low. I pulled into a diner, neon sign buzzing, jukebox humming in the corner. The waitress, a girl no older than me, poured me coffee and asked where I was headed. I told her I didn't rightly know. A group of rough-looking men sat 2 booths over, cowboys or maybe drifters, laughing too loud. One of them, mean eyes and crooked grin, leaned over and said, "That's your truck outside, boy. Looks like it's barely holding together." I felt my blood heat, but I stayed quiet. My daddy always said, "Pick your fights careful." But when I went to pay, I found my wallet lighter, half my money gone. I knew it was them. I stepped outside, heart pounding, and sure enough, one of them stood by my Ford smirking. He tossed my last dollar on the ground. "Lesson for you, farm boy." I bent down, picked it up, and locked eyes with him. But instead of swinging, I swallowed my pride, got in the truck, engine rumbling, and drove off. Now, some folks might call that cowardice, but I call it survival. If I'd fought, maybe I'd be lying in a ditch instead of sitting here telling you this story. Sometimes being a man ain't about winning. It's about knowing when to walk away. That night, I drove till my eyes burned. The highway stretched black and endless, stars glimmering above like a million watchful eyes. The hum of the tires was the only sound, steady and hypnotic. Alone in that truck, I began talking out loud to myself about my fears, my hopes, my doubts. What if I ain't cut out for this? What if I can't make it? The desert didn't answer, but the silence felt like it was listening. Around 3 a.m., I pulled off the road and lay across the seat, using my jacket as a pillow. The cab smelled like dust, sweat, and old leather. I stared at the cracked ceiling of the truck until sleep finally dragged me under. In my dreams, I was back home, sitting on the porch, hearing my mama call me in for supper. I woke with tears on my face and realized leaving home wasn't just about finding work. It was about proving to myself I could face the world alone. That night, I drove till my eyes burned. The highway stretched black and endless, stars glimmering above like a million watchful eyes. The hum of the tires was the only sound, steady and hypnotic. Alone in that truck, I began talking out loud to myself about my fears, my hopes, my doubts. What if I ain't cut out for this? What if I can't make it? The desert didn't answer, but the silence felt like it was listening. Around 3 a.m., I pulled off the road and lay across the seat, using my jacket as a pillow. The cab smelled like dust, sweat, and old leather. I stared at the cracked ceiling of the truck until sleep finally dragged me under. In my dreams, I was back home, sitting on the porch, hearing my mama call me in for supper. I woke with tears on my face and realized leaving home wasn't just about finding work. It was about proving to myself I could face the world alone. Now sitting here, an old man with more yesterdays than tomorrows, I see that road as clear as if I were driving it again. The truck, the storms, the strangers, the fights I avoided, the work that nearly killed me, all of it shaped me. People ask me, "George, what's the most important thing you learned back then?" And I say that every mile matters, every decision matters, and if you're lucky enough to grow old, you'll realize the road never really ends. It just changes. I lean back in this chair, watching the Texas sun dip low, and smile. Because I know I rode that road as far as I could. And maybe, just maybe, some young boy sitting out there will hear this story and be brave enough to chase his own horizon. A few months into my new life in the city, I came back to my boarding house one evening and found a letter waiting for me. It was from Mama. I remember sitting on that narrow bed, oil lamp burning low, hands shaking as I opened the envelope. Her words were simple, written in her careful slanted hand. George, we're proud of you. The farm is still here, and so are we. No matter how far you go, this will always be your home. I read that letter over and over, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time since I left, I didn't feel so alone. That little piece of paper, carried across miles, was like a bridge between the boy I had been and the man I was trying to become. One Saturday night, my cousin dragged me to a local dance hall. Neon lights buzzed, laughter and music spilled into the street. Inside, the jukebox played Hank Williams. Couples spun across the floor, their shoes tapping on the wooden boards. I stood awkward at first, hat in my hands, until a girl with dark hair and a smile brighter than the Texas sun walked up. "You just gonna stand there, cowboy, or are you gonna dance?" she teased. I stumbled through the steps, but she laughed, not at me, but with me. That night, for the first time since leaving home, I felt like maybe this road wasn't just about hardship. Maybe it was about finding joy, too. Nearly a year later, I finally saved enough money to drive back home. The same old Ford carried me across the desert, but I wasn't the same boy who had left. When I pulled into the farmyard, Mama was on the porch, apron still on, Daddy by the barn. They didn't say much, just hugged me tight. But in their eyes, I could see it. They knew I had changed. I walked out to that same porch swing where I used